Okay, so next up on our agenda today, we're going to Kenya. So we're traversing the world today. Started in the US, moved to South Africa, now we're going to Kenya. And we're going to hear from Mr. Samuel Mutisya, who is the head of wildlife conservation at Pejeta Conservancy.
Hi everyone, my name is Samuel Mutisya, the head of conservation in Pejeta Conservancy, and I'm really excited to be part of this conference and to talk about rhinos, a species that I love and that I've been managing for the last 16 years. Pejeta is part of the wider Laikipia Samburu ecosystem and is endowed with every savanna wildlife mammal you can think about. I have been working in this landscape, managing quite a number of populations. I've been involved at national level, at the point of being a member of the National Rhino Steering Committee. I'm also a member of the Association of Private Rhino Land Sanctuaries in Kenya. And therefore, just excited really to be part of this. And what excites me most is really to talk about Pejeta. An integration between wildlife conservation and ranching activities, while at the same time ensuring that we had an attraction to all sorts of tourism activities that you can think of. Africa is a host to 2 of the 5 rhino species known to exist in the world, and these are the white rhino and the black rhino. The eastern black rhino is endemic to Eastern Africa. My talk will therefore dwell mainly on the eastern black rhino. The black rhino is a shy and highly territorial animal that attains sexual maturity at the age of 7 years on average and has an intercalving interval of about 3 years. And this makes it hard for small populations to quickly recover once disturbed. And there was a significant population decline recorded between the years of 1960 to 1980s, where up to 98% of this population was decimated. And this was largely due to poaching activities that were driven by demand for their horns in various destination markets, habitat loss and fragmentation due to increased agricultural activities, weak legislation framework on wildlife management and conservation at large. To address these challenges, Kenyan government in 1989 formed the Kenya Wildlife Service, a body that is mandated by law to protect and manage Kenyan wildlife on behalf of the Kenyan people. There has been a turnaround, particularly for the rhino population. Part of the success can be attributed to the fact that Kenya has had a series of national rhino conservation strategies, with the current being the 6th edition, touching on protection and law enforcement, biological management and monitoring, communication and engagement, coordination and collaboration. These efforts have gradually driven the rhino populations towards gradual increase across the country. "50% of all sanctuaries that exist in Kenya are either nearing carrying capacity or beginning to exceed the estimated carrying capacity, and therefore need for more land is inevitable." Poaching has remained a major concern over the years. And in fact, across Kenya, over the last 10 years, 4 sanctuaries have had to close down due to the high cost that comes with increased poaching and the need to provide security. This is a direct loss of rhino habitat at a time we need it most. The Kenyan population is burgeoning and is growing at a rate of about 2.5% per annum. So the increasing human population puts immense pressure on land and other resources that are a requirement for human existence. And this is the same space within which rhino is conserved. It therefore means that as we move along and in the next couple of years, it will become harder, it will become quite difficult to secure more land for wildlife conservation if we are not going to take into account the demands and need for communities and human beings that live around protected areas. It is therefore important, if we are to secure more space for rhino, to begin to embrace new thinking, to begin to embrace new practices, new land use that will allow for peaceful coexistence between wildlife and human populations. Pejeta is about 4% of Laikipia landmass. Laikipia County is about 10,000 square kilometers. It is predominantly a ranching country, which means quite a number of properties that are north of Pejeta are mainly ranching or ranches. Within Laikipia, there are a number of other rhino sanctuaries, and in between Pejeta and places like Oljogi, which is to the north of Pejeta, are a section of other lands that are either currently not well utilized, not well managed, but that have a high opportunity of being secured for wildlife conservation, wildlife migration or passageways between Laikipia and Samburu County. And Pejeta actually, together with Kenya Wildlife Service and the ADC Mutara Ranch, the likes of Segera and others within the landscape, see that as an opportunity for sustained wildlife conservation. Such spaces where you have community land, private land, you have government entities or government land, being arranged and still with an opportunity for conservation-oriented activities, such sanctuaries should actually, or such spaces should actually come together in a consortium. For example, what we have in Laikipia, Pejeta Conservancy Association, that is actually working towards securing and ensuring that there is harmony of use of these lands, with an ultimate goal of securing that section for wildlife conservation and community development activities. It has been shown increasingly within this landscape and elsewhere that actually growing into contiguous land, in as far as wildlife conservation is concerned, is a cheaper way of utilizing and securing more land for conservation than entirely setting up a new sanctuary on a separate location. This is because you take advantage of existing resources, you take advantage of existing skills, you take advantage of existing intelligence, which may deter poaching, and so many other resources that are within already established sanctuaries as you grow into the adjacent lands. It is important for rhino conservation entities and for all authorities that are involved in rhino conservation to begin to embrace the new way of thinking, to begin to appreciate that as populations grow, or the human populations grow, and as we safeguard and secure wildlife, and particularly rhinos, there is going to be a higher zone of interaction between humans and wildlife. And this kind of zone will obviously result in other challenges, such as human-wildlife conflict. It may result in other challenges, such as actual competition for grazing grounds, actual competition for water and other resources. And therefore, establishing models that do allow for this multiple land use is likely the only way forward for rhino conservation as we move in to the next decade. Pejeta, in this particular case, has gotten into a collaboration with a government entity called Mutara. And over the years, by demonstrating that actually the goals for Mutara, which was initially a government ranch, that by collaborating and working together and establishing the Pejeta model within that piece of land, you do not necessarily lose your initial business, but rather with clever thinking, you can actually use wildlife to enrich your business model. Now that obviously sort of interaction and collaboration has provided an additional 20,000 acres that is going to be available for rhino conservation going forward. You can imagine within the landscape, if you are able to secure more land by ensuring that the activities that seemingly actually are compatible within this landscape are integrated with the wildlife and rhino conservation, so that you take advantage of other economic activities such as tourism. You take advantage of using wildlife as a tool for ecological management. You take advantage of the fact that by also doing other economic activities such as ranching, you're contributing to food security in the country. Then suddenly more lands, more properties to the north of Pejeta and within the Laikipia Samburu ecosystem will become available for rhino conservation as we move forward. This, to me, is the most significant achievement that can be attained if communities, private landowners, government entities work together to create a contiguous habitat for wildlife, to enhance economic activities because of the scale of things created, as well as also providing economic activities in form of employment for the communities living around, and opportunities to train local communities on better natural resource management, is the only way of safeguarding land for expanded rhino conservation here in Kenya and elsewhere within arid and semi-arid lands across Africa. It is for such a reason that Opejeta really was coined. And Opejeta was looking at creating a model that takes advantage of the fact that it had wildlife in it, and the fact that it needed to make money and provide food security through ranching business, through wheat farming activities, and other non-competing land uses, to ensure that the same space is optimally used for the benefit of conservation as an ultimate outcome. It is therefore important for the Kenyan government, for the Kenyan society, Kenyan civil societies to begin to think about multiple ways of utilizing the available land in order to safeguard the various ends and land uses that we may that will help support both human life and conservation going forward.
That's really fantastic, Samuel. Thank you so much for this discussion about successfully incorporating the work that you do in Kenya with the communities in and around which you work. And now I think joining us from Kenya, Samuel himself. Are you here, sir? All right. Hello. Success.
Hello there. Hi. Yeah, sorry about that. I had to, record it because I wasn't sure about the internet connectivity, but it's been wonderful. And so thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, we are very lucky to have you here. And your story of integrating communities into conservation and acknowledging the multiple land uses is so important for conservancies like your own. I wonder if you could answer a question that we received about whether you see land use in Kenya as being a bigger issue with respect to rhino conservation, since that's our theme for the day, but you could speak more generally, whether land use is a bigger issue for species declines than is poaching.
Yeah, thank you. I think a great question there. Both are equally important in determining the growth of rhino as a species. But I think land use is quite critical because, as I said, quite a number of the sanctuaries that we have in Kenya are increasingly getting to their carrying capacity, which means getting more land, that would repopulate or that would help this population continue to expand is important. And the reason why land use and effective, land use for this matter is important is because as human population grows, we are seeing more and more livestock coming into play in some of these semi-arid and arid lands where rhinos have been, core and have been in these ranges for quite a while. And so it is important that the various land uses that are there are supported, be it conservation or human livelihoods. And because this is the only way, the coexistence and finding a way of the two coexisting is the only way we can secure more land for wildlife conservation. As you've seen in the recent past, that poaching has to some degree been contained or put within manageable limits. In the strategy that I was talking about, the targeted poaching was to have less than 1% impact on the population, and which is something that more or less Kenya has been able to achieve. So with a bit of containment, although the threat still remains, there's been quite a number of cases, so the threat still remains. But then it tells you that land and biological management of this species is going to be the next biggest subject of discussion and concern going forward.
That's fantastic. Maybe as a follow-up question to that, Samuel, the greater success that Kenya has had in reducing poaching to keep it below that 1% level, because that's about 5 to 6 times as effective as South Africa has been able to do. Because South Africa for a long time was losing about 5 or 6% of its rhino population a year, over 1,000 individuals a year. Why do you think that is? Why has Kenya been able to be so effective at reducing that poaching of rhino?
I think this is something that Susi actually alluded to, and one is political goodwill. If the government is, and I'm not saying that, but the government has to have a very strong, or send a very strong message, both to the people working within the conservation sector, to the criminals that target rhinos, through poaching, that actually there's a commitment and goodwill to support rhino conservation and that poaching shall not be tolerated. So I think the government has been quite strong in that. Secondly, there has been a very strong collaboration between the private sector and the government itself, because actually nearly 50% of the rhino populations are also in the private sector, which means, within the private sector, and that's what Pejeta is, there has been a lot of investment in ensuring that you have well-trained, highly motivated, rangers within the private sector that are managed as such, supported by the government, like being given what we call the police reservist powers, which is more or less a bit of the powers that are credited to the police force. And that together, working together, government investing quite a lot in training, investing quite a lot in getting equipment, has also contributed to the success and recovery of the rhinos. Intelligence gathering and intelligence sharing between both the state and the private sector has been critical. And I think, largely speaking, working on ensuring that you have boots on ground within protected areas, covering as much ground as possible, supported and deployed, in relation to the intelligence that is available, has been to a very great extent a cause for success in rhino protection and recovery.
I wonder too, given that much of the conservation areas in Kenya are privately owned, as you were saying, 50% or more of the rhino populations are on those privately owned areas. Do you feel that opportunity provides, or that situation provides an opportunity for communities to benefit by the presence of rhinos being on the land more than others, because they can also ranch, they can also herd, they can have their goats and cattle and such in areas?
Yeah, to a great extent, I think it's contributed to the success. Having the private sector so entrenched in rhino conservation in the country, and just that so that we all understand, the wildlife populations in Kenya, belong to the state. So the private sector does not own the rhinos and the wildlife populations within these sanctuaries. And so it is quite interesting that the private sector feels energized and supported to be able to undertake conservation whilst this is not their property, which is quite unique in this setup. And the private sector itself is split into so many other. You have the communal lands, you have the actual community land, and you have privately owned lands. So it means that rhinos currently are split across all those sort of land uses and those sort of, and therefore the community also has a say in some cases on rhino conservation, and they are part of the discourse. They are part of the deliberations and decision making towards, securing and protecting rhinos in Kenya.
Do they have more of a benefit, or do they receive more of a benefit because communities have a large say in the protection of rhinos?
I wouldn't say it's adequate. I think it is something that the government and the private sector are working towards. If you look at the changes in law that has happened in the recent past, whereby the law has been reviewed, and there is now entry of what we call consumptive utilization, which brings benefit to the people, to the private, either conservancies or community conservancies, that is yet to be actualized. But actually, we are beginning to move to the right direction, whereby the communities and the private sector are also, and even the government, are actually being able to harness, profits, if you wish, from having wildlife on their land. So it hasn't been fully actualized. The kind of benefits we would want to see trickling into the community areas, trickling into the private sector, is yet to be fully realized.
But it's happening. It's just not fully.
But it is happening to an extent, where conservancies are making money out of tourism. They're making money out of, hotel business and so on and so forth, but not actually fully utilizing the wildlife as you utilize perhaps in South Africa, or even trading it. So I think there's still space to grow this, but at least, there is some sort of benefit that the communities are getting from having wildlife on their land.
Certainly. We got a comment from Louie Maifala, who will be speaking to us later today from the Bush Babies Environmental Education Program again. And she said that the government, it's a good point, Samuel, the government must be engaged and send out a strong message. It seems like Kenya has been particularly effective in that aspect, more than many other countries.
Yeah, I mean, it has. And just to put things into perspective, I think actually being a rhino manager in Kenya is quite stressful, because the government will not tolerate any slack or any form of. So most of us, have sleepless nights, but it's for good reason. And that sort of pressure from both the government, from both within the standards that you set as a conservation area, I think has yielded quite a bit of success. But as we know, poaching is it's fickle in nature. You could succeed this year, and then next year you find yourself in trouble. So we're always on the lookout, and we are not out of the woods yet.
Certainly that. What's helping us come out of the woods is that Black Rhino range expansion program that you mentioned in your thing, and that Pejeta has been so successful as a leader in that range expansion project. Bringing back species from where they were extirpated is always a challenge. I wonder if you could speak to some of the biological or social challenges that may be unique to bringing back an animal into an area where they have been removed, have been extirpated, have been hunted out. Are there unique challenges to bringing them back?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the challenges is we always talk about range expansion, but beyond range expansion, we always talk about expanding into suitable, secure habitats, and that's where the challenge is. Most lands could be available, but majority will not have the necessary infrastructure, will not necessarily be secure enough for the protection that is required for the rhino. So, some of the challenges here is actually having sufficient resources to be able to safeguard or to secure those lands that you're bringing in under the territory of rhino, or rhino occupation. It's been a huge issue. The other thing is also getting communities to embrace rhino conservation, knowing the challenges of policing that comes along with having rhino within their territory. It's not an easy thing. I mean, most communities would argue that once you have rhino in your space, there is more responsibilities that come along with that. There is more accountability on what you do within that land, that comes with it. which in a way is something that has to be quite explicitly brought out in an open discussion with the communities for them to accept. And the other thing is that, of course, climate change is a big issue. And most lands that, are arid and semi-arid are most impacted by this, meaning that, the rate of degradation within these areas is quite high, meaning that the communities require more land now to graze the same herd of livestock that they had in the past effectively within those spaces without degrading. So in most cases, these lands are degraded. So already when you're expanding rhino territory, you will have to counter some of those issues to do with stocking densities, which are sometimes tied to social norms and cultural practices. So it's also a very delicate thing. It's not a very straightforward thing, but it is something that has to be an open discussion between the government, between the private sector, particularly the private sector expanding into these areas, and the communities, so that they see the benefit, so that they see ownership and decision-making transferred to them as much as these animals belong to the state. So it's something that it's not as straightforward, but it requires a lot of concerted effort between various stakeholders, and that's why I said partnership is quite critical in securing these spaces.
Yeah, again, we come back to this discussion about partnerships and how conservation is such a team sport, right? That everybody must work together on it, and everyone must benefit by the project too. And the importance of making certain that everyone has a seat at the table and realizes that benefit. Your discussion about the impacts of climate change is really an interesting one too. We're experiencing the same things here in Southern California with climate change: hotter, drier, certainly lower water tables, less water available, and thus decreased plants and plant biodiversity. At the Greenbelt project that Wangari Maathai, Nobel laureate, had been initiating and has done such great stuff in Kenya, could that be a possible tool to counter that drying in that area of Kenya that you're experiencing, to make the expansion program a little bit more feasible? Sorry.
No, I think it is obviously one of the ways of combating the issues of climate change that we are seeing. If you look at Kenya, quite a bit of the forests that existed, have somehow been overexploited. There's an ambitious program, of course, of ensuring that 10% of Kenya is under forest cover. That is government ambition and remains the same. And the Green Belt movement is contributing towards that within the forested areas. But these forested areas also are the sources of rivers that are feeding to some of these savanna areas that, for example, I'm calling like Laikipia Samburu ecosystem. And so definitely we are going to safeguard or to safeguard the future and the livelihoods of the people living along the slopes of some of these mountains, because Laikipia Samburu is actually nestled next to Mount Kenya, which is the second highest point in Africa, and which has a significant forest cover and a number of other ranges within the region. So the initiative to reforest these areas is underway, as well as other activities such as recovery of the riparian sections that have over time been exposed to erosion and other vagaries. And basically, but larger than that really is more of livestock management within Laikipia Samburu area, where land is an emotive subject. And what I think we are contributing, and we are looking at working together with communities and other properties, is on sustainable land use practices, ensuring that your stocking densities are right, ensuring that, holistic management of cattle, so that you create and you continue to have space for wildlife and cattle within the same space. So there's definitely a lot that needs to be done. With COP26 and the promises therein. I think we are up for it and waiting to see how much we can get involved in ensuring that things turn around for the better.
Fantastic. Well, Samuel, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for everything that Pejeta has been doing over the last many decades. It's been an honor for me personally to get to work with you all in the past through helping rhinos, and look forward to continuing to work with you here. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you for having me, and the rest of us. Thank you for the team that is listening. It's been very constructive and educative. we'll remain in touch.
Awesome. Thank you very much.